be coming back today. He said he didn't know if they'd be here by tonight or not. They've been on vacation and having a good time. That's good. They need a break. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 22, the Bible is the Lord's talking about Israel, and He's talking about all the some of those adulteries and idolatries that Brother Chris was talking about in Sunday school. How they had forsaken the Lord. Their spiritual leaders had gone astray, and he makes a statement in verse 30. He says, "And I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none." And this morning, the message would be for all ages, old and young alike. The Lord is looking for somebody to stand in the gap. You know, we live in a world, not just our nation, but a world that more and more is turning away from God, and not just turning away from God, but hates God and hates godliness, and has no tolerance. We live in a world that, especially in our nation, people speak of tolerance this, tolerance that, but when it comes to godliness, they don't have any tolerance, and they want none of it. And this morning I feel like the message is for all of us, for sure. We've all got a part in this, but we've got responsibility, whether young or old, towards the next generation of leaders. Now, we're going to focus mainly on Joshua, so we won't be in Ezekiel. I just wanted to use that as a starting point in that verse. But there's many places in the Bible that you see where the older generation prepared the next generation for service for the Lord. And this is just one, but this is it's a powerful one. But Moses was chosen to be the leader to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And you can turn to Exodus chapter 17. Probably be the first place we're at, Exodus chapter 17. We know that Moses' life, if you study Moses' life, Moses lived for 120 years. And his life is, you can kind of split it up into three parts. 40 years that he was in Egypt as a prince, and 40 years that he was in the wilderness. And then when he was 80, God called him. He had that meeting with God at the burning bush, and God called him to go get Israel and lead them out of Egypt. So he was 80 years old when that happened. Well, a lot of times we think of 80 years old. I pray that I make it to 80 years old and I'm as good a shape as Brother Herman by the time I get there. But we look at 80 years old these days as, we're kind of over the hill and we're just on the other side now, and we've done our work. Well, Moses was just getting started with his work at 80 years old. He was tasked with leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. And the thing that we associate with Moses as far as a symbol that he had a rod. Moses had a rod. He stretched his rod out over the sea. He hit the rock with the rod. There was miracles done with the rod there before Pharaoh while they were still in Egypt, but Moses had a rod. Moses had a rod. Joshua, the symbol that would be associated with him would be a spear. Moses led the children out of Egypt. Joshua then, and they crossed through the Red Sea. With Joshua, they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Promised Land is not a picture of heaven. We hear a lot of songs. You've heard probably some sermons about, going over into the Promised Land and so on. But the Promised Land, when we get to heaven, we don't have to fight giants. We don't have to fight and conquer and claim the land. All that's been done for us. So the Promised Land is a picture of victory, a victorious Christian life. There's things that we have to conquer, but this is the things that God promised. And we have those precious promises, but it's something we have to fight with the flesh, our bad habits, the world, the flesh, and the devil. That's the things we have to fight with. And Joshua had his nations and the giants and so on that he had to fight with. Crossing through the Red Sea, that's a picture of salvation, but they weren't living in victory while they were wandering around in the wilderness. And we can be saved and not be living in victory. And the children of Israel, because of their disobedience, they had all the promises, but they chose early on not to believe God. And so it's a picture of salvation, but they just wandered around for 40 years in the wilderness because they did not believe God and claim those promises. So Joshua's a picture of victorious Christian life. He's leading the children of Israel across the Jordan River. And the Jordan River has a lot of significance, but that would be something totally different that we would look into. Joshua, I had to look into it and study a little bit deeper. I'd heard about Moses, in his age, 40 years old when he left Egypt, when he fled, 80 years old when he came back and led them out, 120 when he died. Joshua would have roughly been 40 years old when we first hear about him here in Exodus chapter 17. He was probably born about the time that Moses fled Egypt. So Moses was 40-ish, and Joshua would have been born. And then when we first hear about Joshua, it's here in Exodus 17, verse 8, the Bible says, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim, and Moses said unto Joshua, Choose out men, go out, fight," and so on. And that's the first place we hear about Joshua. We don't hear how he was chosen to do this. We don't hear, how he came to be in this position, but obviously he was a brave man. He believed God, he had faith, and he had some aptitude for fighting. So he was a warrior, and Moses said, "I choose you to organize an army. We're going to fight with Amalek here." So he was, and Joshua lived, he was something like 40 years old or after 40 years old when this happened. He was 80. He was also 80 when Moses died. He had been somewhere around 80 years old when he took charge of the children of Israel, just getting started again. But by the time he had reached those 80 years, he had seen several milestones in his life and his service. So, we think of Joshua as a young man, but everything we hear about Joshua, he was older than I am now when he was serving with Moses. Everything we hear about him in the Bible, he was beyond 40 years old. So Amalek, when he fought with Amalek, we know this story, and they were wiped out at this time. But this is the story, and we won't read it for sake of time this morning, but when Moses asked Joshua, he said, you choose out some men, go out and fight. And I'll just read a few verses here. With Amalek, tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. Verse 10 says, So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. So Moses and Hur had to stand there and hold up Moses' hands. Aaron and Hur, had to hold up Moses' hands so that rod would stay up. And as long as that rod was up, the armies of God prevailed. And they defeated. This was the first major event that we know of. And what I would look at as one of the three major milestones in Joshua's life. And so we see the first thing, this was the making of the leader of the next generation right here. So, and again, we see this isn't a teenager. This isn't even though it could have been, God can use young people. This isn't a man in his 20s or 30s. This is a man over 40 years old, but he's being trained under the man of God. And we will soon see that he's being trained for a specific reason, because he's going to be the next leader of the nation of Israel. They estimate that something like 2 million people came out of Egypt. Well, in the 40 years that they were walking around, others were born. The ones that came out of Egypt that didn't believe, they died during those 40 years. I don't know how many now that Joshua's looking at taking over. But, of course, this was before they were going into the land of Israel. But one of the first major milestones in Joshua's life, and one of the things that just sticks out to me, he just served, and he did what Moses asked him to do. He recognized that Moses was the leader that God had chosen, and he recognized that God was worthy to be obeyed and revered and honored, and so he followed Moses in obedience to God, but he served under Moses. And what Moses asked Joshua to do, Joshua did it. And he had faith. You know, I'm sure there was different times when Joshua was down there fighting. I don't know what the situation looked like, except that Moses was up on the mountain and the rest of them were down lower. Joshua probably looked at different times, and he sees, oh no, they're getting the better of us. He looks up, and those hands were going down. I'm just going to have faith that God knows what he's doing. And Aaron and Hur's got to lift those arms up. And he just kept with it. He kept with the program. He served alongside of Moses. And as a leader coming up, young men and young ladies too fit into this, because God has an order. And mothers help to lead the children. Mothers are the guide of the home. And the same principles apply. We serve God. We do things his way, and he will honor us, and things will go well with us. So he served under Moses, and he was taught by Moses. Look at verse 14. The Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial. They defeated him. They defeated Amalek here. He says, write this for a memorial in a book. And notice what it says next. It says, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. Rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. And this is why it says, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. If it hadn't been written down here, nobody would remember Amalek. Because of their wickedness, God said, not only are they all going to die, I'm going to utterly wipe out their remembrance. And Joshua is going to be the next one. And he knew that Joshua would be writing a book of his own. And he said, him being the leader, this is a memorial right here. You need to rehearse it in his ears. Joshua was being taught. He was serving, but he was being discipled by Moses. And as a leader, coming up leader, us young men, young ladies, we need to be discipled. We need to be serving underneath somebody that's a godly example, that's following the Lord. We need to find somebody and learn from them, and learn of God's ways and ask them. I've had two grandmothers now, one great grandma and then my dad's mom, that they had Alzheimer's before they died. And I remember especially my great-grandma. She lived with us for a time. And there were, if you know anything about Alzheimer's, you'll know that sometimes they can remember things, most of the time from way in the past, not necessarily from that day or the day before. And then sometimes they just don't make any sense. And during those times, during the day usually was the time that she would we could talk to her and she would remember things from when she lived down here in Jones Holler. And me and Caleb and Joshua, we would sit there and visiting, talking with her, and we would just ask her, tell us about how it was. Tell us about your house, where you lived, how you walked to school, and all these things. And because we knew that it wasn't long and she wouldn't be able to remember any of it. And she would tell us about things in the past. And she was a godly lady, and she knew she had seen things. And we need to glean from the older ones around us and ask them about the times when God delivered them from something, or when God provided for them. The times when they saw people getting saved and God working and moving. We need to follow those things and ask about them and learn about them from those that have gone before. One man said it this way. He said, "Get wisdom as cheap as you can." What he was saying was, you don't have to learn everything for yourself. You can ask from other people's experiences and learn things that way too. And most of the time, as far as mistakes that are made, that's the best way to learn. We don't have to learn everything by making our own mistakes. But we need to ask about God's moving in the past from those that are older, because we are the next generation. We're the ones coming up. And I look at this, I say, man, I'm not even to his point right here. I'm just a young man. Brother Josh, Ezra, we're just young men. Seth, you're a little bit younger man. We're the next generation, and we're coming up. We need to learn. We need to ask Brother Herman. We need to ask Brother Mark. We need to ask these older fellas with the silver hair. We need to ask these older ladies about how God provided, how God moved in the past, because it's the same God. This same God that gave these commands about holding the rod up. He was talking to Israel here, but that's the same God that we serve. It's the same God. He deals with Israel one way. He dealt with them one way back here. But it's the same God. He has the same power. He has power to save. We have an advantage over these things here. They didn't get to see everything. If you read in Hebrews, they didn't get to see things after Jesus Christ died on the cross. We had the advantage of knowing what some of these things mean and all these types and shadows. But we need to look and ask people from the past. We need to be disciples of godly people. That was one major milestone. The second one I see is when Exodus chapter 24, Moses went up to Mount Sinai, and when he got the tables of stone, the 10 Commandments, we call them. And guess who was with Moses? There's only one person went up in the mountain with him. It was Joshua. I don't know how much Joshua saw. It was pretty thick up there, a lot of clouds, and nobody could see them up there. The top of the mountain was covered in a cloud so that everybody wouldn't die. But Joshua was with him. Joshua had a relationship with God. He was the Moses' assistant. He was the up-and-coming leader of this nation, but Joshua had a relationship with God. You know how we know that? In Exodus chapter 24, it tells about how he went up there, but in Numbers, I'll read this real quick. Numbers chapter 32 and verse 12. I got to skip through Leviticus here. Numbers 32, verse 12. This is what the Bible says about Joshua and Caleb. Save Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. This was talking about those that didn't get to go into the promised land, and those that did wickedly. He said, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. They have wholly followed the Lord. Joshua had a relationship with God beyond just saying, well, Moses follows God, so I follow God. Joshua had something deeper than that. Joshua had a relationship with God. And that's something that's we have to decide at some point in our life, and I've preached that here before, that I believe God because of what I see in His Word, not because Dad always taught me, or Mom always told me, or Brother Mark always says. We have to know God for ourselves, and we have to follow Him for ourselves. Young people, we're the next generation coming up, next generation of leaders. That's what we're talking about. And we have to follow God for ourselves. We need to study the Bible for ourselves and know and ask God. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, which giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. If you ask God, God, I'm reading through my Bible here, I don't understand this. Could you help me to understand? He's not trying to hide it from us. He'll show it to us. We need to ask Him. We need to seek it, and then we just need to ask Him. Let's explain this to me, Lord. I need to know this for myself. And Joshua had that. But that on Mount Sinai, you know, Joshua was up there and he heard Moses was coming down, met up with Joshua somewhere on the way down, and Joshua said, I hear the noise of war going on down there. Moses said, no. He had a more experienced ear. He said, it's not somebody that's striving for mastery. It's not war. I hear singing. Something's not right. Because when you hear singing and it sounds like war, it's probably not praises to God. There was a rock concert going on down at the bottom of the mountain while God was getting the law from God. And Moses messed up and smashed the thing. When he got down there, he got upset and had to end up making the second one himself. By the way, the originals there were destroyed. That's how, when people talk about the originals of the Bible, you know, we have to go back to the originals. God just had Moses write some new ones. God's not worried about the originals. So when somebody's trying to say, oh, you know, we have to go back to the originals when it comes to the Bible, there was another one that just happened to be written on stone. I'm glad we got pages for our Bible. That'd be a big book. So the third big milestone before he took over that I want to look at this morning is when he spied out the land. Joshua was among those, and Caleb. They were among those. Used to sing a song in a church we used to go to. They had super church down out with the children, and they would say 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. And it was about this where they went to spy. And they saw the giants. They probably exaggerated some. We were as grasshoppers in their sight. There were some pretty big people, apparently. And Joshua and Caleb were the only ones that said, we're well able to do this. Another big milestone in his life. Joshua never wavered. You never really saw. You see in the book of Joshua, after they're into the promised land, he made a few mistakes in judgment. But it wasn't. He just got in a hurry. It wasn't anything like Achan did. He just, when those fellows made up themselves to look like they'd come from a long ways, he just didn't stop and ask God, are these people telling me the truth? He just got in a hurry and made a covenant with them, and then the Gileadites, I think it was. And but he believed God. He believed God. As a leader of the next year, we've got to believe God. We got to know that God is able. Why do we need to be so set on these things? Why do we as young people and old people, why do we need to be set on these things? Because the world, the flesh, and the devil is against us completely. Joshua had the task of leading the children of Israel through an unfriendly world. It was a nation. They were a nation with land that was promised to them, but they didn't have a home base. They were living in tents. They didn't have a place of their own. That was what they had to go conquer. And we are a people that we don't belong here, except God's put us here for now. This isn't our country. We're strangers and pilgrims. Our home is in heaven with God. We're on our way. We've been put here for now. But this is an unfriendly world. And just like they had to fight the flesh, here they were breaking off their earrings and making golden calves while God was talking to their leader up in the mountain. And they mingled with other nations. They disobeyed God. They went after false idols and so on. The same way, we have to fight with our flesh in this world. There are so many things that are against us in this world. But as leaders for the next generation, godly leaders, we have to just say, God's able to do this. We've got all these giants that we're against, and they're only getting bigger. They're only getting bigger. The fights are only getting harder. Our children have to be prepared for that fight. Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 28. This is for those of us that have those that we train. I'm a young leader. I'm just about where Josh was at when he was starting with Amalek. But I'm also training those younger than me. I've got children. And when I'm gone, and in Revelation, the Bible says to strengthen those things, the things that remain. My children most likely will remain after I'm gone. And I've got to be the Moses for them. I've got to teach them. Deuteronomy 3, verse 28. Moses was told to charge Joshua. Give him a charge. Give him a vision. Paul gave Timothy a vision in 2 Timothy in chapter 4. And he said, you know what, you're going to have struggles. That's where he said, he told Timothy, be instant, in season, out of season. Make foolproof that ministry. Do the work of an evangelist. And he goes on through that chapter. And he said, it's going to be hard. But he said, Timothy, I've fought my fight. I've kept the faith. And there's a crown of glory laid up for me. But he said, I'm leaving soon. And it's time for you to step up, Timothy. And Paul was doing the same thing as Moses here. He says, so Paul gave Timothy a charge. Moses gave Joshua a charge here. He says, charge Joshua. Charge him. What's that mean? He just tell him this is for you now. This is your responsibility. We need to give our children a vision. Because if they don't have a vision for how to serve the Lord or what to do with their life, the world has plenty that they will offer them and say, you need to follow your heart. You need to follow your passion. You need to, all kinds of things that the world tells. Get what you can what you get. The world has all kinds of ideas and plans for our children, and we need to give them a vision, a charge. The second thing that we need to do, Moses, encourage him. Fill him with courage. And Deuteronomy 31, I'll read this one. Deuteronomy chapter 31. This is how he encouraged Joshua. So, well, how do you do that? Well, I think it's a testimony of our own life, because our children watch us and they say, well, if our parents can't do what they're telling us to do, then maybe, they learn so much from us. They catch so much from us. And if they see it, it's so much easier for them to understand and say, and I can think back on things I saw my parents do, and I didn't have to think twice about, how do I go about serving God, or how do I make this decision, because I watched it happen. So I was familiar with it. I watched it in their life when I came to a hard place. Deuteronomy 31, 7 and 8. And Moses called unto Joshua and said unto him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and of a good courage, for thou must go with this people into the land. That was part of his charge. He was telling him what he had to do, which the Lord hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. And listen to this. Here's the encouragement. And the Lord, He it is that doth go before thee. Now, when he said that, it wasn't just like, well, the Lord will be with you. Joshua, when he heard that, he remembered back to all the things he saw God do. He saw the Red Sea part. He saw manna come from heaven for years. Manna fed them in fact, it was clear up after Moses died when they crossed the Jordan River. The first day that they ate the corn of the land, that's when the manna stopped. So when he's saying the Lord's with you, Joshua can think back and say, oh yeah, I've seen the Lord work. So that carried weight with Joshua because he had seen it happen. The Lord, He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. Joshua was, like I said, about 80 years old, a little older than 80 when he took over. And you know what Moses had to tell him? Be strong and of a good courage. You know what the angel told him? It was the Lord Jesus, I believe, when he was across there and he said, whose side are you on? And theirs or ours? And he said, I'm the captain of the Lord's host. And Joshua bowed down before him, took off his shoes, bowed down. And he told him, he said, have courage. When I think about that and I think, okay, Joshua was 80 years old, you wouldn't think that you'd have to tell that to, but he was just a man. He's an 80-year-old man that had seen all these things that God had done, but he's just a man. And he had to be told, he had to be encouraged. Have courage. You can do this. Remember what God's done in the past, and He'll do it again. And there was many things that were remarkable. There's songs written about the walls of Jericho and the things that were seen that Joshua saw after he took over. But we need to give our children courage. They have to experience God with us, and then they'll know that they can experience God for themselves when it's their time and we're gone, like Moses was. And then strengthen them. Let's just turn to one more passage here, Luke chapter 22. How do we strengthen our children and those that we are discipling to be the next generation of leaders? There's many scriptures. There's many things we could look at. Luke chapter 22, verse 31. The Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you. Jesus was fixing to leave. He was fixing to be crucified. He said, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. And Satan would desire to have our children and just destroy them. Sift them as wheat. But he says, but I have prayed for thee. This is Jesus talking to Simon, to Peter, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brother. Strengthen thy brethren. We're commanded to strengthen. We need to pray for them. We're going to have to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But strengthen them. How do we strengthen them? They've got to learn now, while they're young. They need to see the work of God in our life, experience for themselves in their life while we're still here. We guide them through, and before we're ever gone, God's so real in their life that they don't really need us because they know they have God. Amen. So that when they see us laid out here in a funeral, they don't say, Mom's gone now. I wish I had asked. I wish I knew how to proceed now. We need to have them beyond that point, before we're gone. When they see us, they need to just be comforting other people while we're laid out there. Sad that we're gone, but they have the Lord. And they didn't really need us as far as spiritual guidance at that point, because they had the Lord and they've experienced God for themselves. We need to strengthen them. We need to encourage them. And we need to give them a vision for the future. We're against the world, the flesh, and the devil. They're against us. We're leaders from 80 years old and down, 90 years old, whatever. Moses was a leader. Joshua was a leader on up in those years. They were leaders to the end of their lives. But we're bringing up children. They're going to be the next ones. And what are we going to say? Joshua said, choose you this day whom you will serve. Moses was long gone. He said, as for me and my house, I'm going to serve the Lord. And he was telling Israel, if you all don't follow him, and he probably knew that there was a good chance that some of them wouldn't. It happened before. He said, that's your business. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And that was his challenge. And I ask you all today, I've had to ask myself the last several days I've been studying this, what am I doing to train up my own children? But what about me? I'm just getting started. I ought to be feeling that way, just getting started. Not midlife. When it comes to serving the Lord, it's all the way to the end, just like Moses and Joshua. We need to see not so much how long we can go, but what can we get done. How much can we get done? We don't know how long we're going to go anyway. We don't know the end. But that's my challenge this morning as we get a song. Choose you this day whom you will serve, Joshua said. As for me, I'm going to serve the Lord.